Welcome to the Once a Cowboy, Always a Cowboy podcast, where you hear the history of Chaney football from the unique perspective of Coach Ron Berdis. All right, so we're here for second conversation, and last time we talked about Red Angelo and his influence on you and so many other players in the Chaney community, and so the next thing that we had talked about tackling was just the history of the program and the legacy of the program. So I guess for me, one of the things that is the question that I think I'd like you to kind of answer or give light to, and I know how I feel, but what do you think the legacy of the Chaney Football Program is, right? And from 1926 until you left in 2006, 80 years, and even now, after a hiatus coming back, what do you think the legacy of the Chaney Football Program is?
Well, I think growing up, as I told you, 200 yards from United States Steel Open Hearth. I mean, literally 200 yards. That certainly is a factor in all of this. And I say that as I'm sure that the large majority of guys that didn't go on to college ended up in the steel mills. Mm-hmm. So with that school being in the shadows of the open hearth or the steel mills, the mentality and the legacy, if you will, is a kind of if you don't work, you don't eat mentality. And I can say that as someone whose father worked 43 years in the Youngstown Sheet and Tube, Camel Works, and my memory is of us being secure in a warm house and him getting up and going out at midnight, bundled up, my mother handing him a brown paper bag with his lunch and kissing her and going into the mill. And I used to tell that to our players, that that's what being a man is, taking care of the things that you that are important in your life and that you need to. So in answer to your question, I think that is the Chaney legacy, is that if you don't work, you don't eat. And I think every coach sold that ideal, and it served at least the four of us very well.
Yeah, and I remember, many a pregame speech I got to sit in when I was coaching for you, and hear those, and the lunch pail mentality. That was a theme of many of them, and that's what we as coaches and players, and for you, was we hung our hat on that. Was in game preparation, we were going to outwork. In physical fitness, we were going to outwork. And that definitely rings true. One thing we alluded to it in the previous conversation was, to me, it's just amazing. And I think this is something that really differentiates the Chaney Football Program from so many others. Up until your retirement in 2006, there were only 4 head football coaches. From 1926 to 2006, 80 years, there were 4 of you. Ches McPhee from 1926 to 1953, Red Angelo comes on in 1954 to 1970. Ed Matey, who was a player for Red Angelo from 1971 to 1986. And then you from 1987 to 2006. And one of the things that I felt like, if I were in your shoes, to me, as a former player, like, that seems as like a sacred position. Like, as a position that is protected, right? It's honored. It's extremely special, and not just anybody gets it. And what does that mean to you, just hearing that and then also living that, being one of four?
As I told you the last time, as a kid, meeting Red, having Ches walk me across the field to meet Red as a ninth grader, having my father played there and be very successful there. Chaney was always an ideal, a dream. It was always something that was very special. Going to the old timers reunions at Lakeside Golf Course with my dad, and seeing these guys bigger than life and meeting them, and probably not realizing at the time the greatness that was in front of me, but still being in awe, just because I couldn't go anywhere, or or I should say wherever I went, it was always stories of, if do you play football? And I, at that time I'd have been at Holy Name, yeah. And, well, if you could be half as good as your father, you'll be a great player, which I never was, half as good as my father. But I know I was a player because, and I can say that with certainty because Red told me that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And it was. I was in awe as a young kid being around that, and then when I had the opportunity to go there, it was an aspiration that was excitement and just full of anticipation of following in the footsteps of my dad and the stories that I've heard about all the greats that came there. So it was a dream come true when I entered as a sophomore. Actually, when I went to West as a ninth grader, it was a dream come true.
And so, did you have that same that same allure, that same I don't mean this the way it sounds necessarily, but it almost seems when you have three people who have been in your position, right? In 1987, you're hired as a head coach. There's three of you, three head coaches prior to you. It's almost like, hey, you know what? We're passing the torch to you, or you're getting crowned. Is that more of a burden or more of an excitement, or a little bit of both?
Well, having coached with Ed and playing for Red and Ed, and having known Coach McFee, it was very, very humbling.
Yeah.
I mean, when I interviewed and when I was named the head coach, I was, I was extremely humbled, and it was probably next to the birth of my children the most excitable time of my life.
Yeah.
So it was certainly a dream come true.
So we're going to start with some of your knowledge of Ches McPhee and that goes back nearly 100 years. And he starts in 1926 at, which is, ironically, at which would have been West Elementary. That was Chaney High School at the time. For some of our younger individuals, which is actually where I started teaching. Right, my grandmother went to school there, graduated, from there. I started teaching there, and so that's where Chaney was at the time, and his record was 120, 120, 111, and 23. A lot of ties back in those days, tons of ties, and he had an undefeated team in 1929. So, what are some of the things that you would like to share about Coach McPhee?
Well, I actually got to know Coach McPhee because he was the director of Bort's Pool. So as a kid going there, my dad would say, hey, make sure that you say hello to Coach McPhee. He was my coach, and so I went and introduced myself to him, and from that point on, every time that I went to Bort's and he was there, he'd come out of the office and he'd say the same thing every time. He'd say, "Hey, Berdis, you tell your father that I'm going to box his ears off." But he also would tell me stories too, but not as many as his wife Mabel, who, Ches wasn't around when I became the head coach at Chaney. He was already gone, but Mabel was still alive, and I'd have her at the banquet every year. I'd bring her into the banquet, and she would be sit with my wife and at a table of honor, but I would introduce her as the first lady of Chaney football.
Nice.
And she was a character, man. She really was. She was up, and her son Frank would bring her, and the two of them together. It was really important that our players, know that and see that and know what they represented and who they were. But getting back to Ches, as I told you earlier, he at a track meet, he saw me, hanging around, and he says, "Come here, I want to take you over." And that's when he walked me over and introduced me to Red. And I was, again in awe. Just, I had heard of him, but I certainly never met him, and that was a very, very special moment in my life. When I was fortunate enough to get the job, that, as I said, was the ultimate for me. I mean, I had opportunities, having been at Syracuse for 2 years because of Red. I mean, really. I mean, Red referred me there, saying, "Hey, they need a GA, and Jerry's there," and and they took care of me, and I was able to get that position because of that. And thinking that was the avenue that I was going to go. I was going to go, the college coaching, and coming back and landing the Chaney job was again, that it was one of the highlights of my life.
So, some highlights from Coach McFee. He coached 3 All-Americans, and I think that's one of the things that we talked about. Maybe one day we'll kind of go talk about the greats of the program. Frank Sienkiewicz, George Poshner, and Frank McFee, which is his son, in 51 and 52, so a 2-time All-American. So that's a pretty special experience. That'll get you some wins. 5 City Series titles outright, and then 4 Co-City Series champions. And we touched on this with Coach Angelo. Is there any knowledge of the City Series during that time, or who maybe? When in my research, it seemed like South was kind of the one of the top teams during those early years of the City Series. Is that accurate, do you think?
Yeah, and they were. South and Rand were the 2 schools that I think were at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Chaney, Wilson, Northeast, branched off of that. But they played, even the 29 year, the undefeated year, they played Steubenville to a 6-6 tie. Weirton, West Virginia. I mean, there was, they did some traveling.
Yeah. Must have been in a Model T or something. I don't know if they had buses back then.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I'm amazed to look back and see some of the schedules, and they weren't regulated to just city play. Well, of course, in those early years, Ursuline and Mooney hadn't gotten involved then till when Mooney opened in '58, I believe.
Somewhere in there, later on, yeah.
So, but I'm not real familiar with, other than knowing that they were city champs this year or that year, but no question, Coach McFee had, besides Pochner and Sienkiewicz and his son, there were quite a few players that went on and distinguished themselves in the college and semi-pro ranks.
Yeah. One thing I was wondering, do you have any knowledge of what the game of football, the X's and O's, were like during that time? Is this like single wing? Intriguing. I don't know if you ever saw any film or talked to your dad or what.
I didn't. I've never seen any film, and I don't know whether they filmed or not. And I don't recall having any conversation with my dad. But I know that when I was at Holy Name, we ran single wing when I was like in 6th and 7th grade. So I'm assuming that was the flavor of the day.
Okay.
And which would really make sense, because if you look at some of the programs from back then, there guys that were running backs, or like Sienkiewicz is listed as a back, not as a quarterback.
Right.
They're wearing number 66 or something like that,
right.
So it was a lot of that single wing, and that was kind of a forebearer of shotgun.
Right.
I mean,
yes.
So a number of coaches over the years have told me, everything just gets kind of recycled.
That it is, and for anybody who doesn't know about the single wing, look it up, because it's being run, today in different forms for sure. One of the things that we had talked about previously and one of the players that I think is interesting to me, and it kind of fits in our time frame, was George Poshner, and he was a great player. Went to Georgia with Sienkiewicz, Purple Heart in World War II, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I was thinking about was maybe you could tell us a little bit about that story, his story, and then also, I wonder how all of that affected the high school football programs during World War II, or I don't know if you have any insight to that, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about George Poshner's story.
Well, I don't claim to be the authority on this because, I know what was told to me, and either by my dad or by friends of my dad in the neighborhood or community, and it's my understanding that Sienkiewicz wouldn't go to Georgia without Pochner.
Mm-hmm.
And and I don't know how scholarships worked then, but they both went there, both had success, and he was Pochner was Sienkiewicz's go-to guy, and they both made All-Americans. So obviously they were pretty good. And certainly Sienkiewicz went on to win the Heisman, and then he did service time, from what I understand. And so I don't know quite how that worked, but Pochner went from Georgia, I think, directly into the service, and was wounded. I think it was the sidebar of the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah, right.
And was under a tree for days, and with his wounds and frostbite and gangrene, and lost a number of limbs, and but lived, and was certainly a war hero, if you will. And I was fortunate enough to go to his funeral, full military honors, and met him a number of times prior to his death, and what was really an inspirational guy. Was extremely positive, if you will, despite everything that happened to him.
Right.
And as I said earlier, the old timers things that my dad would take me to, he would come up, and my dad had nothing but tremendous things to say to him. And I will say this: I have to get this another plug in for my dad. Frank Sienkiewicz told me that he modeled his game. My dad played in 29. Sienkiewicz played in 37. So he came obviously after my dad. But he told me when they dedicated the rock and the track to him that he modeled his game and career from my dad.
Wow, that's impressive.
Pretty special compliment.
Yeah, absolutely. Be interesting to see if we could maybe somebody has some. If we're getting this out there, maybe somebody has some film stashed away somewhere. It'd be pretty neat to see, right?
It would really be neat to see.
So wrapping this part of it up, what do you think? And you alluded to it in the beginning, but what do you think Coach McFee specifically, the impact he had on the future of Chaney football?
Well, he made him an instant winner. if there's a pattern here, if you think about this, Ches came in as the birth of the program.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, got it off the ground and got it going. So in 3 years, he's undefeated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Right.
That's pretty special.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a testimony. That's a testament to him and to the toughness of the guys that were in his program. Red came in, struggled at the beginning. Ed came in, struggled at the beginning. We came in and struggled at the beginning. But for Coach McFee to come in and, like I said, give birth to the program and have that type of success and have those type of players that he molded, that's pretty special.
Yeah, yeah, and I think what's really special about this is, to me, as somebody who I enjoy the history of it, is, he's really not that far removed from all those kids that you coached, right? All those young men, because of your connection with Ed and Red and Ches, right?
Oh yeah,
it's really a family tree, if you will, the grandfather, great grandfather of the program.
Yeah, absolutely.